floor.
Oh.
There we go. And we are back in committee to hear from the taxpayer advocate, Jeff Dooley, about his annual report to us. You are welcome to come join us in the chair. Thank you very much. It's also posted on our committee webpage. This is sort of a part of our annual cycle of testimony, but I think is particularly important this year as last year was a wild year in taxes. And I think more of our colleagues learned of your office and your work, and I appreciate all the extra work you did last year. Thank you. Where's yours?
Okay, so my name is Jeff Dooley. I am the taxpayer advocate for the Vermont Department of Taxes. And the taxpayer advocate is a role that was created in the department in 2001, and then it was codified in statute a few years later. And basically, the way the statute lays it out is my job to identify subject areas where taxpayers are having difficult times interacting with the department, identifying classes of taxpayers that are having problems, proposing solutions, including administrative changes and legislative changes, educating taxpayers concerning their rights and responsibilities, educating professionals, and assisting individual taxpayers in resolving problems with the department. So that's the way the statute is worded. The way I like to think about it on a day-to-day basis is I kind of have two roles within the Department of Taxes. One is kind of a macro role where I'm trying to act as the voice of the taxpayer in any department meetings or whenever there is going to be a new proposal or change in the way that the department is going to be interacting with taxpayers, and then also interacting with the legislature, you guys, annually, and telling you what I'm seeing and what any of my recommendations are. And then I also have kind of a micro role where if taxpayers are having an issue where things have gone off track with the department and they need things put back on track, I can assist them. And then I can also assist through a process called extraordinary relief, which is when the letter of the law applies to someone in a way that's unfair, unforeseen, or creates significant financial hardship. I can step in, make a recommendation to the commissioner to go around the letter of the law in that one particular case, and then he can either approve or deny that request. So the major area where I actually focus tends to be in the property tax credit. That's where the most Vermonters seem to come and have issues with interacting with tax law, particularly because it does often involve high dollar amounts for low income individuals, and there's some very strict deadlines. And it's very complicated. A lot of people don't understand it, which also creates a lot of problems and confusion with people filling things out correctly and getting their forms in correctly. So in the past year, I believe I assisted 51 cases came before me. 42 cases were approved. Of those 42 cases, 88% of those were property tax credits, 6% were renter rebates, 6% were personal income tax, and 2% were corporate income tax. That's kind of how what I do on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so moving forward, just in the last year, one of the major administrative initiatives that we had was instituting the child care contribution. That was a pretty big lift for us across the department, both in terms of technologically having to code all that into our systems and make the changes to the forms. And then the big lift was in the education field, trying to get people to understand what their new obligations and responsibilities were going to be around this contribution. We did targeted mailings to employers and self-employed individuals. We had We had seminars online that people could attend, and then we put those links to those on our website. That's so people who couldn't attend could go and watch those videos afterwards. And then as we started implementing it, if we saw things that were clearly wrong, where someone had very high withholding, but weren't reporting any child care contribution, or the child care contribution looked very different than it should have looked based on their other reporting, we reached out to those taxpayers individually and let them know that, hey, it looks like you might not understand your responsibility regarding this new contribution, and here's what it should look like, so that they don't end up having to get audited 3 years down the road and have to pay interest and penalties at that time. This isn't in my report just because I didn't get a chance to talk to our new communications staff. We do have now a fully staffed communications staff. Before we just had one person, now we have three. And so we're pretty excited about what we're going to be able to do with that fully staffed communications team. But one thing that I know that has been a concern or interest of this committee is reaching out and connecting with some underserved communities in Vermont who may be entitled to credits but aren't aware of it, or they don't have a filing requirement, so they're not taking advantage of these credits even though they could. So I wanted to see what we were doing, or what we have been doing, and then kind of start making a plan for what we're going to do going forward. So what we're currently doing is we're sending information to all the libraries throughout the state with sending information regarding EITC, child tax credits, things like that, getting those resources out to them. So if someone comes into the library, they can have access to that information without necessarily having to reach out to our website or interact with us to get that. I believe we have started working with the Community Action Network to try to have them help us get word out to various underserved communities and people who may not know some credits that they might be entitled to. Going forward, one of the major initiatives that the communications team has is to improve language access to the department. So translating our forms and our materials into different languages, and also making sure that people with disabilities, whether it's hearing loss or vision impairment or something like that, would also be able to work with the department and meet their responsibilities with us. We plan on building some better relationships with various charitable organizations throughout the state who may be interacting with people who we don't interact with. From what they told me, we'll be able to really track this in a real way, number of documents translated, things like that. We're going to start looking at credits issued to Vermonters year over year, and maybe digging down and seeing how many new credits were issued to taxpayers who hadn't taken advantage of those programs.
I think I'm thinking about sort of information to taxpayers, especially those who don't usually file in sort of two different buckets. That's my word today, apparently. Is sort of the CTC, the EITC,
Yeah.
those like lower income tax credits, right? That especially, like undocumented folks, parents of young children, workers newer into the workforce, those populations. And then property tax credits for especially older Vermonters is sort of the other big bucket that I'm thinking about that often has no idea about what's available. Are you thinking about them? How are you imagining that landscape?
I think that's probably a useful way of thinking about it, because I do think that the EITC and the child tax credit are kind of a separate thing, whereas the property tax credit, as you all are aware, I'm sure it's kind of its own animal, and has its unique challenges there. So I haven't focused in my discussions with them on the older population with the PTC, but that's something we can definitely, I'm sure we can partner with AARP and some other organizations that may be interacting.
Last year, we did a whole lot of work on tax sales, and the tax department was not particularly involved in that because it's a municipal issue, right? Not really a tax department issue. And so the working group that was working that summer on this, legal aid, bankers association, et cetera, they might have a lot more visibility on the populations that tend to not know about the property tax credit, because we put a lot of pressure on municipal, like on clerks, basically, to be putting out the word, but they have such specific legal obligations about how they phrase stuff.
Yeah.
And sort of a communications body might be able to do very different.
Yeah, and it is a challenge. I know, especially, I mean, e-filing is great. It's made our life a lot easier, and it's cut down on a lot of errors. One of the drawbacks is that because people just enter their information into TurboTax and it automatically does everything every year, that they don't realize that when they stop having a personal income tax obligation because they only have Social Security income or whatever, that the other stuff isn't being taken care of automatically the same way it was in the past. So yes, I do think that is a problem that I have. And there's also things where, one spouse has filed the taxes every year for 25 years, that spouse passes away and the other spouse doesn't realize that the property tax credit is something that they have to deal with and file for every year. So there are a lot of unique challenges around that.
Can I ask one more question to reach populations? I've heard from a surprising number of constituents this last year who moved to Vermont, have some sort of, amalgamation of income, right?
Yeah.
Like, and moved to Vermont maybe even like more than 5 years ago, but retained their accountant from wherever they lived before. And like are 10 years into not realizing that they are due certain things. What do you do about that? Like, what do you personally do about that? And what do you think we should do about that as a system?
What I personally do about that is I'll usually try to get them at least a year or two of back property tax credits. And not because when I first started in this position and someone was using a preparer, what prior commissioners had done is be like, well, if they used a preparer, it's not our responsibility to make them whole. The preparer is the one that messed up. They have liability insurance. They should be the ones making the taxpayer whole. Realistically, a lot of these Vermonters don't have the resources, or it's not worth their while to spend $2,000 to get a $1,000 property tax credit in court. So it's not realistic in a lot of these cases to ask them to go back and have their preparers make them whole. So that's what we do. Systematically, that's a tougher question. Because it doesn't make sense for us to do outreach to every preparer in every other state to let them know about the Vermont property tax credit, because we are the only state that has something similar to our property tax credit. So I don't know, other than when someone moves here, making them aware of it and being like, if you use an out-of-state accountant, make sure that they're aware of the Vermont property tax credit. But then again, it can be hard to target someone who moved in the state because you don't know that they just moved into the state. So,
I mean, I know that in my area, our economic development authority has like a whole welcome to Vermont package.
Yeah.
And like that teach people like how the garbage works, like where to buy the groceries, that kind of stuff. And I imagine like sort of tax tips in Vermont might make sense in that context. I don't know. I imagine realtors know who's moving into a new house in Vermont. And the Realtors Association is
Yep.
fairly good at spreading the word about things. I don't know.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we can look into. And then just going forward, I am going to be meeting with our communications team on a monthly basis to kind of discuss what I'm seeing in areas where we can improve our outreach in certain ways. And this is still just kind of a half-baked idea, but they proposed.
Love half-baked ideas. Go ahead.
But potentially doing kind of taxpayer advocate branded outreach, being like from the office of the taxpayer advocate, because that may be received better than just something from the Department of Taxes.
I think so. And something we've been talking about in this committee is just like, people don't know that you exist, like our colleagues don't know you exist. And
Yeah.
I feel like the office of the healthcare advocate is like very large in our minds as representatives, mostly because when someone comes to me with a health insurance problem, I can like send them somewhere that solves the problem, and that feels magical. And so we've been sort of spreading the word, especially this year, about you. But I think branded content would be delightful in this day and age.
I was just about to say, I think there's a fairly robust network of areas on aging that you could get the word out to older people in terms of tax advantages and that sort of thing that are not aware. The area agencies on aging.
Okay.
In most communities, there's a group that does that.
And they have like a parent organization,
Okay.
the area agencies on aging.
Excellent.
But structurally, I mean, the healthcare advocate is not in the health department.
Correct.
Yes.
So,
I am in the Department of Taxes. Well, it's interesting. I see, well, first of all, in this testimony and this report, this is mine. This doesn't get pre-approved by the commissioner or by anyone at the Department of Taxes. This is solely my report. But you know, ultimately, if the department is going to do something, it comes down to what the commissioner decides is going to happen, and I could put my 2 cents in. But if the commissioner doesn't agree, then we're not going with my idea. But I do see it as part of my responsibility to call out things that I see aren't working or need improvement in the department, even if that, you know, makes me a little bit unpopular at times inside the building. But yeah, I'm not truly independent. That's accurate. Okay. So that's what I have for administrative initiatives. I do have a statutory proposal this year, which the issue I'm trying to fix, I see as fairly simple, but the way the statute is created, I apologize, it's fairly complicated, or can be seen as a fairly complicated fix. But I've seen this more than a handful of times since I've been in this position, is someone is going through the process of getting a divorce. Both they and their spouse are on the deed to the home that the one spouse is staying in while they're going through this process. And when they file their property tax credit, while this process is ongoing, they have to include their spouse's income in their household income. And then they also have to claim 50% ownership of the property rather than 100% ownership of the property, because the other spouse isn't occupying the property. And this can result in a huge reduction in the property tax credit for someone who, if their spouse had been living there, they would be getting, you know, a $4,000 tax credit. Now, that's because their spouse isn't living there, they're getting a $1,000 tax credit. And most of the time now, they're the only person contributing to the household expenses. And they're probably going through a difficult financial time as it is. And so I feel like it's a fairly punitive result that's currently in the law. So what this proposal does, and I worked with Abby Shepherd to try to craft this, is basically it still requires the person to include their spouse's income in household income while they're going through the process of the divorce, but they get to claim ownership as if their spouse still lived there. So if they and their spouse are joint owners of the property, they could claim 100% ownership and get the credit that they would have gotten if their spouse had still lived there. So that's effectively what this statutory proposal does.
I was wondering about that. I read that a few times, trying to get my head around it. If it's a contested divorce, when they're arguing over who benefits and who doesn't, wouldn't that affect what you're talking about? Who gets the tax credit, who gets,
I think it's just like who's sitting there. Sorry.
Yeah, the only person who would be entitled to the credit is the person who's physically occupying the house. So, so the ins and outs of the divorce proceeding don't matter until that becomes finalized. If the other spouse is ultimately awarded the home and the other person has to move out, then that person can claim the property tax credit in subsequent years when they're physically occupying the home. So this only deals with the period between when the divorce is initiated and when it's finalized.
I'm just thinking documentation wise for the tax department, they would have to have
Which
a
is-
checkbox saying currently in the divorce proceedings, right? How would they?
No, we would probably ask to see a copy of the initial recording of the paperwork for the divorce proceedings to show that they actually are involved in an act of divorce.
Representative Wozniak, Higley, and then Brannigan. Okay.
I'm just gonna repeat back what I think I heard you say, and just correct me if I'm wrong. So under the current system, they're going through a divorce, spouse B is no longer living in the house, spouse A is living in the house, and they are only receiving 50% of the property tax credit.
In some cases, it can be less than 50%, but yes.
Okay, and that other 50% does not go to spouse B because they're not in the house and it just kind of disappears into the ether.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it.
And you're proposing that spouse A, who's still living in the house, would just receive the full property tax credit.
Correct.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for being late. Maybe you've already answered this question, but in listening to you, many divorces take many years to finalize. So this could go on for as many years as that divorce is taking to finalize, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
And actually, I'll piggyback on that. That's one of the reasons why I think this is valuable, is because the way the law is currently written, it is as if you file for divorce on Monday and the divorce is finalized on Friday. And we all know that's not how that actually happens. So there can be multiple years where this happens. So it isn't such a one-off that it only affects one or two people.
Thank you.
I have two, oh, sorry, you were next up. Go ahead.
What happens when spouse B wants to apply for a renter's credit?
They would still be entitled to one.
He would.
Yeah, but they would have to include spouses A income in their household income. But there wouldn't be an ownership issue because it's renting, not owning.
So the state would end up paying full credit on the house and renter credit to these two people. So renter credit on spouse B also, right? So all three, so it doesn't seem right.
Well, I mean, that could happen now if the problem or the issue is that it's joint ownership. If spouse A owned the property outright and then spouse B left and got rented someplace, spouse A would have to include the spouse's income in their property tax credit, but they would still get 100% because they would own it 100%, and spouse B would still be able to rent. So this is just basically treating it as if the person, and that'll happen once the divorce is finalized as well, when they do have 100%. So it's just treating it almost as if it's already happened, where they've gotten full possession of the house during the years while it's pending, basically.
He continues to claim his partner's income on his.
Well, not after the divorce, but while the divorce is going on, he would have to claim his spouse's income for his rent, for the sake of the renter rebate or renter credit, sorry.
And the spouse is renting an apartment down the street. He still claims his income and gets the money from the state based on his spouse's income and his own income.
Yeah, the total income of both, yes.
And then the other spouse, the one that's renting down the street, he gets to claim the renter's rebate.
I'm sorry. The,
Can I ask a?
Sure.
Let's try to, so to, what makes sense to me is to treat the pre-divorce separation as if the divorce has happened.
that's what this is essentially doing, except for you have to include the spouse's income.
Why do you have to include the spouses?
This has come up in the past, and I guess people are afraid of people playing games to, like, if someone's has to work in a different part of the state for 2 years, then they basically file placeholder divorce papers, so the person gets a larger property tax credit. It's not something I actually think is too much of a, issue, but that was one of the problems when I had proposed not including the spouse's income and household income. Is at the time that makeup of the Ways and Means Committee was very concerned about people playing games and having sham divorce proceedings.
What if someone was never married and had a common law arrangement for a decade?
Then they would just need to claim the income while the person moved there, and once the person moved out, they wouldn't have to claim it anymore.
But you wouldn't, there's no fear of sham in that case. Yeah, okay. We can make our own policy decisions.
You can, if you want
I
to,
just want to clarify.
if you want to get rid of the household income part of it too, I would not.
Does that make more sense to you, Representative Brannigan?
No.
Okay, great,
Think
okay.
about it overnight.
Okay.
It will, something makes me uneasy about this thing. I count 3 people here and there's only 2.
I think I genuinely think this is a whiteboard situation where we had house 1 and household 2, and then we had spouse A's and B's and
Mhm.
move them around with little circles and then decide where the filings are. But
Yeah.
we're not going to decide this today. We're just going to get sort of a preliminary conversation about it.
Yeah, because of the definition of household and statute, it gets very confusing about who's in the household and who's not at any given time.
And one of the things we talked about today with Jake Feldman was, if we're redoing the property tax credit system, why are you retaining this definition of household income that drives everyone crazy? So I think that's another question on the table.
Yes.
Do you have any other legislative?
No, I mean, I just have the long-term one I have every year, but it sounds like you've probably covered that more with Jake this morning, so I won't rehash everything.
You're welcome to rehash a little bit of it if you'd like.
It's basically just about how complicated the system is, how it has really trips up a lot of people. No one understands it. And it's, for a lot of lower income people, it's the most important thing that they get from the government that keeps them able to pay their bills every year. So for something that's this important to be this poorly understood and this complicated and this tough to comply with is unfortunate.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You said that more starkly than Jake, so I appreciate you reading. Any other questions for me? Thank you so much for all the work you've done over the past year, for all the work you will do over the next year, and for coming in and joining us. I think we'll probably have you in again as we continue on with our work. So really appreciate your, like this year in particular, your attention on sort of us as we're getting through all this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Folks, we are done for the day. We are back here in the morning at 9 o'clock, except we are in the pavilion at 9 o'clock. Okay. For a joint hearing with House Education.
170.
270. That's one of those rooms when you go upstairs and you wander around for a
Right
bit.
next door in Elkhart.